Hello all, this is James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade, and I am here in Imperator, Rome. This is not a Let's Play series. This is actually a view or not view, but a video I've been wanting to make for the past couple of days, but I've been putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, and that is my official review video of the game. I love Paradox games. I'm a huge Paradox fanboy. Understand that from the get-go. This review video is likely biased. I have almost 4,000 hours in CK2. I have 1,000 plus hours in Europa Universalis 4. I have nearly 1,000 hours in Hearts of Iron 4. I have almost 2,000 hours in Stellaris. I have played a lot of Paradox games. So one could say I'm a fanboy. And I am. I'm a huge fan of Johan Anderson, one of the elder statesmen of Paradox, whose Paradox philosophy has been for years to make games that they enjoy to play. And Johan, he's got great taste in games. That's readily apparent from all of the games that he's been instrumental in taking part in and making. I think CK2 is probably, if I understand my Johan right, might be his least favorite of the games. But that's okay because I quite love CK2. It is overall my favorite. So Johan, I think he probably loved Europa Universalis 4 the most out of his games, and I think Imperator Rome, it screams Johan Anderson in my mind. Everything about this game just seems like his perfect game. And I'll be straight up honest, I enjoy it far more than Europa Universalis 4, which I think was his favorite game up until this. And so, the thing I think I share a lot of similarities with Johan in what I like about games, but I'm on a slightly different end of the Paradox spectrum. So Paradox kind of has a spectrum of games that go from CK2 being peaceful and less map paintery to a game like Imperator Rome here, which is very aggressive and map painting. So CK2 is probably the most peaceful game, whereas most of the other Paradox games fall along the spectrum of getting more and more and more aggressive and less peaceful as you move away from CK2. I think Johan falls on the opposite scale of the Paradox scale. I'm a more peaceful side of the Paradox scale. He's a more warlike side of the Paradox scale, but the fact that we both love Paradox games means we are both part of a unique community, a loyal grand strategy gaming niche. And be very clear, this is a niche market. To play a Paradox game takes a certain amount of patience. It takes a certain amount of intelligence. It takes a certain type of person. And not all gamers fall into this category. My friends refer to Paradox games as spreadsheet simulators, and that could be a decent assessment for a person who likes a more action-paced first-person shooter type game. A game like Imperator Rome could seem to be very much like a spreadsheet simulator. So where am I going with this? Well, there's been a plethora of negative Steam reviews regarding this topic, regarding this game, and honestly, they're not well founded. They don't make sense, and that's so. Not only is this going to be a review video, this is going to be a fanboy defense video, because the easiest thing I can say in this review video is I love this game. This is a great game, and and now I'm going to go into defending Paradox and Imperator Rome. So maybe I should rename this not a review video, but a review defense video. Maybe I'll name it that. If you look at this UI, you're going to notice some very common denominators. Country flag up in the top left, almost always there. Power, mana, currencies along the top, to include stability, aggressive expansion, tyranny. Tyranny is a fairly new thing, but aggressive expansion isn't. That's been in most every Paradox game. Stability is not a new feature. That's been in most every Paradox game. Religious power is kind of new. Oratory power is sort of new. Civic power is sort of new. Military power certainly is not new. Military power has been around for a while now. So basically, we've expanded the PowerPoints out into different named topics than what they've been in previous titles. But the process of gaining PowerPoints is not an unusual thing for a Paradox title. Manpower most certainly is not something new for a Paradox title. Money is most certainly not new for a Paradox title. Where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is that this entire UI is everything you expect in a Paradox UI. It's the same UI that was in Europa Universalis 4. It's the same UI that was in Crusader Kings 2. This UI is standard Paradox. It doesn't get any... If you've played Crusader Kings, if you played Europa Universalis, even Vicky to an extent, if you've played any Paradox game before this, you will quickly understand this UI, and there is no learning curve. It's second nature. It's like a keyboard. When you put your fingers on a keyboard, they go on ASDF JKL:. That's the home key. You know where that is on a keyboard because that's just the way it is. The Paradox UI, you know exactly where everything is because that's just the way it is. It's something that has been trained into a Paradox Grand Strategy player. But yet, you read Steam reviews about this game and they talk about how the UI is clunky. And that makes me scratch my head. That makes me say, have you ever played a Paradox game before? Because this UI is the exact same thing as every Paradox UI before it. And so then you have to question the legitimacy of a huge number of these reviews. Are they really long time fans of the game of Paradox? Are they really long time Grand Strategy players? Or are they first time newbies who have never played a Paradox game before in their life? And if so, having no understanding of a Paradox game, what it's about, jumping in and then slamming it and leaving negative reviews, because you didn't like it, I suppose that's, from one viewpoint, acceptable because you didn't like the game, right? You bought the game, so you have a right to your opinion. Sure. But did you research the game? This wasn't a hard game to research. It's been played before our eyes on Twitch. It's been played before our eyes on YouTube. There's been an entire dev clash that played through, what, 13 weeks of a dev clash, with 12 weeks of that coming before the release of the game, and the final session being just after the release of the game. It's not like the game has not been played right in front of people's eyes. It's not like they couldn't just go to YouTube, type Imperator Rome, and get all the gameplay footage they could ever want, and discover if that game was something they were interested in or not. No, I've heard strange things being said, like the game was overhyped. Really? How was this game overhyped? Paradox has done nothing really out of the ordinary here. They released a Steam trailer. They do that for all of their games. They've done a dev clash, which, again, that's not something that's, well, new. If we think back to Stellaris, can anyone remember the Blorg? Or if you watched the Steam Let's Play series in which, who was it, CK Nor? Was it CK Nor or Blondie was playing with Wiz? And they created a race called the Blorg that was repugnant and looked kind of like a phallic mushroom, and they played the heck out of it. They played the heck out of Stellaris before your very eyes, before the game was ever released. Basically what I'm saying is, this is what Paradox does. Paradox is very transparent about their games. They do a lot of things on Twitch and a lot of things on YouTube, and that's awesome. That's one of the reasons that I love Paradox, is because it's so easy to communicate with them. They are some of the most communicative developers you'll ever meet. I feel very close to them. I feel like I know something about almost each and every developer at Paradox. There's no other game company that I can name so many developers. Without even being worried that I can't do it, I could name more than 10 developers from Paradox this moment without even having to think about it. You've got Groogy, who's crazy. He always does stupid stuff in the dev clashes, and he's fun to watch. He's a riot. You've got DDR Jake. You've got The Wiz. You've got Johan. You've got Kaiser Johan. You've got DA9L, also known as Daniel or Salty Daniel. You have Bjorn B. You have Katz. You have Bratton. You have Trintragula. You have Kaiser Johan. You have Starnan. You have Rainbow. The list can go on. I could continue to name Paradox employees, and in fact I could tell you what all those people do. Like, for example, Rainbow is the new community manager for Imperator Rome. Stacy, who has been doing CK2 for a while, has just transferred over to the prison game, Prison Architect. why do I know all this stuff? Because of these dev clashes and the opportunity to learn about the people making the games. I'm almost like a fanboy of them, if you will. Most companies like EA and Bethesda and so on and so forth, they do not have that type of transparency with the gaming community. You can't name everybody that works in the company. You don't know what they do. You have no idea who they are. You have no idea if they even play their game. With Paradox, you know 100% that they're playing their game because they do it right before your very eyes. So when I see stupid Steam reviews, like I've been seeing for Imperator Rome, it really riles me up. Because Imperator Rome has released is a very solid Paradox release. Imperator Rome is very enjoyable. The game is a complete game. It is no different than when Stellaris released. It's no different than when CK2 released. It's no different than when EU4 released. In fact, I think it's better than most of those releases. It feels almost like a better, like one of the best released Paradox games out of the gate that I can remember in my lifetime. And I'm over 50 years old, and I've been playing Paradox games since the beginning. But yet, you have a 42% mixed review score on Steam that just makes you have to scratch the head. It's like, who are these people? Where are they coming from? Well, I can't help but feel like there's a lot of people that are almost on a crusade against Paradox. And they're crusading not against Paradox per se, but against DLCs. And to an extent, I can understand how a lot of these DLC haters, if you will, how they've gotten to where they are. Because there has been a lot of bad DLC mismanagement by many developers. Just think of The Sims and all the garbage DLCs that came with the Sims titles, and you've just got one very easy example to point at off of the top of your head. But Paradox is not amongst the people that misuse DLCs. Paradox, in fact, is the road mark. If there was anyone that does DLCs perfectly, it's Paradox. Paradox does DLCs right. They always have, and I love that. I love the fact that CK2 is still being developed. My favorite game is still being developed. I love the fact that good games aren't just being copied for a sequel, but they're continuing to be developed. How good is CK2 with all the DLCs compared to, let's take Total War series, for example. There's been, you know, Total War when it first came out was a pretty incredible game. The second one was pretty incredible game. The third one was a pretty incredible game. The fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th has just been a freaking clone of the first three. It's just been, can you think of anything new? Why do you just bring out the same game every year with different sprites and slightly different mechanics and call it something new and charge people $60 for it? I'm sick of it. That's bad business. That is why I like Paradox's DLC policy, because they take their best games and they continue to develop them. And that, to me, makes far more sense than dropping your best games and trying to make a sequel. DLCs make sense. And I will always support the Paradox DLC policy as long as Paradox continues to do their DLC policy correctly as they have done. Now, if you can... So yes, I've got slightly off track there. I was, went from understanding how the DLC haters have come to their mentality, to defending Paradox from their mentality. So you have a whole section of gamers who probably haven't even played a Paradox title ever. All they know is Paradox releases a lot of DLCs. And because they release a lot of DLCs, they will never play a Paradox game. And that's all good and great for them. You know, you have your beliefs and you're sticking to your beliefs, and I can support that to an extent. But you shouldn't throw stones at a glass house you know nothing about. So while you might want to hate DLCs, cast the stones at the DLCs that you understand. If you hated the fact you got ripped off for a clothing DLC in The Sims, then spread the hate on the Sims forums. Propagate your hate in the right direction. Don't take it out on somebody who's doing DLCs properly. But they can't figure that out. Most of these DLC fanatics are just like, DLC bad. Game has DLC, game bad. That's their thought process. Then they go and they bash it, whether or not they've played it or not. Then you have the other groups of players who have been playing or have been trying Imperator Rome. And that's people that have been interested in Paradox because they've stumbled across Paradox from alternate venues. Paradox is a publisher. Paradox is a publisher for a lot of good, small developers. PDX publishes games like Steel Division, or, well, at least they started off publishing the guys who made BattleTech. Now they actually own BattleTech. So there's been a lot of good products that PDX as a publisher has backed and have supported. And that's because PDX as a publisher doesn't just put their money behind, doesn't just back anyone. They ensure that who they're going to be publishing are great games. And so Paradox has developed a certain amount of reputation for being linked to a certain percentage of good games. So if you're interested in a game like Steel Division or BattleTech or any of these other games, you may or may not understand that Paradox didn't technically develop these games. You may not quite understand how publishing works, and so you hear the name Paradox, you think Paradox made those games. Okay, so this happens. It's a lot of gamers don't quite understand the difference between a publisher and a developer. No big deal, right? So then they go and they play a true Paradox developed game like a Vicky 2 or a CK2 or a Europa Universalis 4 or Hearts of Iron 4, actual grand strategy games. And these are spreadsheet simulator games, as my friends call them. They're very complex. They take a certain type of person, which could be a very different gamer than the gamer that plays Steel Division, or a very different type of gamer than the gamer that plays BattleTech, because they're nothing like each other. Then you also throw into the mix Stellaris. So Stellaris, I love Stellaris. Stellaris took grand strategy into the sci-fi universe. It maybe made grand strategy a little more streamlined. Say what you want about Stellaris, but it is streamlined compared to most Paradox grand strategy games. It's a much simpler beast to get into. And And then they've also took a lot of the best parts of Crusader Kings and threw it into Stellaris. So Stellaris really was an excellent way to expand the grand strategy universe into a demographic or group of people that may not have been completely for a spreadsheet simulator. My friends will play Stellaris with me. They won't play Crusader Kings with me. They'll play Stellaris with me. They won't play Europa Universalis 4 with me. Why is that? Because Stellaris is, for lack of a better word, dumbed down in many regards, and at the same time, more interesting in some regards, in some ways. That doesn't. That just means that Stellaris is a little different than the other grand strategies. I think of it as grand strategy light. Now, you take this expanded group of people who are learning more and more about Paradox, and Paradox as a business has grown quite a bit over the years. They've come a long way from the dozen or so people that they were back when I first started playing to the 400 some people they have working now. That's incredible growth, and they've been very successful. They've published the right games. You know, they've never had a grand strategy game that really failed. All of their grand strategy games have really been, for the most part, a complete success, as will Imperator Rome. I have no question in my mind in Imperator Rome it's going to be a success based off of what I've played of it. It could be one of the best. It could end up to be my favorite Paradox game of all time, though it's got a long ways to go before it'll pass Crusader Kings 2. But right now it's off to a good start. So where am I going with this rant? Basically, for lack of a better word, and I'm going to use this word for the shock value, filthy casuals, or normies, or normal people, or casual players. They've discovered Paradox. They don't completely understand what Paradox is, but they do know that Paradox exists, and they do know that Paradox has released Imperator Rome. Also, Paradox's footprint online has been getting bigger, in that they've been utilizing Twitter, they've been utilizing YouTube far more effectively than the past. And gamers are also utilizing Twitter and YouTube more effectively than they used to, which means it's easy for a large group of people who don't understand the subject matter or the demographic genre that a particular game is designed for to hear about a game, not exactly do their due diligence and research into said game, fall into some sort of hype and or I don't like the word hype. I prefer the idea that these people just aren't doing their research. You see a bunch of people talk about a game, you think it must be good. But how do you know that game is for you? So, Fortnite, for instance. I have no desire to play Fortnite, nor would I ever want to play Fortnite. It does nothing for me, and I know that fact. Had my friends have all talked about Fortnite in front of me, had I been exposed to more Fortnite exposure before it released, maybe I could have possibly bought Fortnite out of a knee-jerk reaction, if you will. Kind of you're walking through a checkout aisle and you see the candy bar and you gotta buy that candy bar because it's there type deal. I think that there's, sadly, because of social media and YouTube and how gamers are as a community, you can get a fair number of people purchasing a game that really they have no business purchasing. And I think a little bit of that has happened because, let's face it, Paradox has been broadening its wings. They've been branching out into things beyond grand strategy. But Imperator Total Rome was not an attempt to branch out. It was hearkening back to the roots of Paradox. Imperator Total Rome is a true grand strategy game. It is, it is pure spreadsheet simulator. It is what guys like me love. And there's a lot of guys like me that love this type of game. And so this game is not going to fail because they have such a loyal following of guys like me. So you can complain and you can cry and you can shout at the top of the mountaintops how horrible this game is, how clunky its UI is, how contentless it is, how Paradox is just trying to put out a shallow game so that they can steal all your money through DLCs. You can cry me a river all you want to with whatever conspiracy theory you think, or complain about how boring this game is for you. Fact is if you feel this way, I guarantee this game wasn't your demographic. It wasn't made for you in the first place. And while you're welcome to your opinion and you're welcome to make your Steam review, I wish you'd just go piss off. Because why did you buy this game in the first place? Did you do any freaking research about it? And if you didn't, it's on you, because there were literally hundreds of hours of gameplay that you could have watched to figure out exactly what this game is. And if you couldn't take the time to do a little frickin' research to discover what the game was, then too bad, so sad. I really don't care that you quote-unquote got gypped by this horrible Paradox game. Wah, wah, wah. And lastly, there is this other group of reviewers. I've never been a big fan of people that do this. So when I read Steam reviews for games, I want to know if the game is good, if it's fun, if it's something enjoyable. Not if it's bad because it won't work on my computer. I hate the technical issues that fill up Steam reviews and cause Steam reviews to go sideways. Because if there's a bug, if there's some sort of issue with the game not functioning because of drivers, because of video card, because of hardware related issues, whatnot, what else, that has nothing to do with the quality of gameplay of the game itself. It has nothing to do with whether or not that game is fun, with whether or not that game is something I want to buy. And so when it gets clogged full of negative reviews from people who simply haven't been able to play the game because of a technical issue, it just pisses me off to no end that Steam doesn't have some sort of way of separating the chaff from the wheat. Technical issues should be a completely different reviewed thing, and it shouldn't down the game from the correct reviewed focus of the game. Is a game good based off of if it's fun, if it has merits, if the gameplay is good, not whether or not it runs or not. That is a wholly different thing and shouldn't be part of Steam reviews per se. I think there needs to be some sort of technical Steam review that says, yeah, this is a really fun game, but here on the technical review side of it, almost nobody can make it run. Instead of, this game is complete shit, and because it's got, glaringly shit reviews, you don't even bother to look at it. But for people who have gotten it to actually run, they say it's an amazing game. But you don't know that. All you knew is the game was crap because 80% of the reviews called it crap because they couldn't make the game run, and the 20% of people who could make the game run thought it was the greatest thing ever. And maybe you would have been amongst that 20%. You don't know that. All you did was take the reviews at face value. Okay, so I digress a little. There's also the number of people who will mark down a game in a review based off of a technical glitch, and then they won't leave the fact that they're marking it down because of a technical glitch. They'll just put on some stupid one-line comment like, this game sucks. Well, why does the game suck? Because it wouldn't run on my computer. Well, you could have said that. Maybe we would have had some notion of where you're coming from. But I digress. That's Steam reviews. So, here we are. Here I am reviewing Imperator Rome. And what I can honestly tell you is if you are a long-term Paradox fan that has been playing grand strategy games for a long time, then you will love Imperator Rome. This is a great game. If you've never played a grand strategy Paradox title before in your life, and you have a short attention span, and you like games that are full of action, this probably isn't a game for you. You're somewhere in between that demographic, do some research and find out if this game is something that you might be interested in. And it's very easy to do that research because you can watch thousands of hours of gameplay all over the internet. And you can make a credible, logical opinion based off of that. So, I guess, to make a long story short, Imperator Rome, for a true Paradox fan, is 2 thumbs up, great game. If you're not a true Paradox fan, you might not like it. Anyway, I'm Jaames Johnson. This is my content. This has been my review of Imperator Rome. Yes, I haven't really gone into any of the game mechanics because I don't feel a need to go into the game mechanics. This is basically a better version of Europa Universalis 4. If you are a Paradox veteran and you've played Europa Universalis 4, you will feel right at home here in Imperator Rome. In fact, Imperator Rome is a superior Europa Universalis 4 as far as I'm concerned. It's got amazing trade. Uh, Far better trade than Imperator ever had. It has much better army control. You group your armies out into multiple armies far more commonly. They've done a lot to get rid of doom stacking. Doom stacking is not as much of a thing in Imperator Rome. Um, yeah, they've just made a lot of improvements of Hearts of Iron 4, or not Hearts of Iron 4, but of Europa Universalis 4 in this game. And I can't recommend it more because it's fun, and that's what my reviews are based off of. Is the game fun? And Imperator Rome is a lot of fun. Anyway, I'm Jaames Johnson, aka Sulfurblade. This review has probably been longer than it needed to be. It was more of a defense of Imperator Rome than a review. And that is that. So, have a great day all, and peace.